Well, what was the most watched TV series of the 1960s? Well, on this episode of Brio TV, the podcast, we have a bonanza of inside information. So giddy up, partner. Okay, well, this episode is for anyone who collects, watches, cherishes DVD box sets. I know you can stream just about anything these days, but there is something about collecting your favorite shows, seeing them in complete, lovingly restored editions, and especially when they're loaded with extras. Today, I'm in conversation with an executive producer, curator, archivist who is famous for leaving no tin of film unspooled in search of the rarest of extras. Hell, he even found an interview I did in Hollywood over 30 years ago, and he added it to this beautiful big box set we're going to be talking about today. If you're still searching for a last-minute Christmas gift, you'll want to listen into this episode before ordering a gift for the classic TV fan on your list. So we've got a great guest today and been dying to talk to this gentleman. We've chatted before, but we really wanted to do a podcast. And this is going to be exciting for folks who collect DVD sets, in particular Bonanza fans. I'm talking with Andrew J. Klyde, and he's an attorney, historian, archivist, I believe a 16 millimeter film collector too on the side. He's consulted with CBS and Paramount Home Entertainment for the DVD release of Bonanza, starting with the individual first and other seasons, but also now, excitingly, the whole series in a beautiful box set, beautifully preserved, really state-of-the-art visuals, and some juicy, spectacular extras, a lot of them with roots in Canada. So very, very excited to talk to you today, Andrew. How are you doing?
I'm good, Bill, and I'm very happy and excited to be able to talk to you about our favorite topic, vintage television show.
Yeah, and you do collect. You have some 16 millimeter film, is that correct?
Absolutely, I do.
Yeah.
I do.
What do you collect? Some TV shows?
I do. I guess the jewels of my collection would include one network print of an episode of Bonanza without the commercials, unfortunately, but it does have the opening NBC peacock and the closing NBC snake, and that's exciting.
Yeah.
And I also have several episodes of Adventures of Superman.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I have a couple. Yeah. I have Superman's dog, I think. There's
the dog who knew Superman.
Yes, the dog who knew Superman, and there was one... who was that actor? He was the voice of Winnie the Pooh.
Sterling Holloway.
Yes. So he's running a computer in another episode I have.
Whistling Bird, possibly. Mr. Kelso is the...
Mr. Kelso. Yeah. Very good.
I also have trailers and NBC promos for NBC shows. So they're not complete television shows, but they're 60-second, 90-second, 1-minute commercials, which are fun to have.
I love that stuff. I collect fall preview reels and all of that. You and I could nerd out for a couple hours on that. I'm going to skip over to the DVD stuff because this is pretty cool for others who don't collect 16, but they collect on DVD. And tell me, Andrew, and do you prefer Andrew?
Either one.
Okay. We live in a world of TV on demand, of streaming, and I've got several great DVD collections, but how robust is this field? Is it something that is at a level that is still a great business? Where are we at with DVD collecting?
Well, I cannot speak definitively and authoritatively on the business money side of things. I can say that there continues to be a strong interest in physical media, thanks to good people like yourself and others who have a strong presence online and continue to promote the release of wonderful titles in the classic television genre and current television shows in production and current films and, of course, classic films. So I think that streaming affords convenience to most consumers, but there are those who think of their favorite programs as they would think of their favorite books. I would think that some people are happy to go to libraries or to download and read things digitally, but there are others who cherish the thought of having something tangible, something material, something they can put on their shelf, be it a classic cherished book from childhood or a classic cherished television program or film from when they were at a young, impressionable age. So DVD continues to sell in significant numbers that justify production companies and studios to continue to create product for physical media, DVD and Blu-ray, and more recently, ultra-high definition 4K. Oh, I don't know if you heard, that's my text message coming in. It's a familiar bit of music.
That's all right.
Yeah, well, sorry for the interruption. So to answer your question, I think it's viable. I think that there are collectors out there who want to have something that's memorable that they can keep in their library. And I would like to think that the casual appreciator of classic television and film would also be interested in physical media, because simply those who stream can stop streaming, and you're at the whim of the streamer, you're at the whim of the location and bandwidth and all sorts of variables. But if you have a disc you could pop into your player, then you could watch it anytime, and I think that's invaluable.
I think too, a lot of these studios and networks, media companies, they were also eager to leap into the streaming with both feet. And then we went through this COVID period, and part of that was helpful in that people were isolating. They were watching all kinds of stuff. But what I think the thinking eventually was that, oh my goodness, this business of providing bottomless amounts of entertainment is very, very, very expensive. And the old models, the broadcast model and the DVD models, they actually were pretty good businesses, right? They had a way of making money.
I think so, and I think interestingly, if you look at the timeline, video cassettes were popular, were prominent for a long time. People bought their favorite show on videotape, VHS format, after Betamax, and then DVDs came in and became ubiquitous, very popular, and then Blu-ray. But before I think Blu-ray had a chance to catch on, Netflix introduced the streaming concept, and the streaming concept exploded before Blu-ray really had a chance to catch on with viewers. And I think that's probably why today DVDs outsell Blu-ray. So it's a matter of technology, modifications, improvements, and viewers being offered all sorts of opportunities. Another thing about physical media, which you're very aware of, I'm sure, which I think is worth mentioning, is the abundance in many cases, if not most cases, of extras, of bonus and special features, which for the most part you do not get in any other format except the physical media.
Well, that is so true of this Bonanza set, the very handsome set you've put together. And there's this great treasure of a lot of it Canadian extras that were TV shows at the CBC in Canada, interviews with Lorne Greene, all kinds of things. And man, oh man, if you love this show, you will jump into this with 2 feet. But we'll talk a bit about that. Andrew, how did you come to Bonanza? Are you old enough to have seen it when it was back in its first run? I mean, I was about... When did it go off the air? 73, 70?
Exactly right.
Yeah, so I would have been 15 at the time. I remember the ritual at our house was you'd watch Disney, then you would watch Ed Sullivan, and then Bonanza, right, at Sunday nights. And if you were really young, you had to go to bed when Topo Gigio came on Ed Sullivan at 8:30, so you missed Bonanza, but later on you got to stay up. Did you see any of this when it was new?
Sure, sure. I remember Topo Gigio begging Ed Sullivan, Eddie, kiss me goodnight.
Right.
and somehow, miraculously, I was able to convince my mother and father to let me switch. But to be honest, I had more success when NBC experimented in the summer of 1972 and put reruns of Bonanza on Tuesday nights. They called it Ponderosa.
Okay.
In anticipation of the show going into syndication. And as you'll remember back then, Bill, there was something of a superstition, I guess, and maybe some weak legal argument made that you needed to change the titles of television shows before putting them in syndication if a show was still in production. Hence the phenomenon of the Dick Van Dyke daytime show, the Raymond Burr show instead of Ironside, Happy Days Again instead of Happy Days. So somebody decided that we couldn't call it Bonanza, we have to call it Ponderosa. So the ratings for Ponderosa, which were episodes of Bonanza going back to the 1967 season at that point, were good. So good that NBC decided even further to experiment and pry Bonanza from its traditional Sunday night berth, where it had been for a decade since the 1961 season, and put it on Tuesday nights opposite Maude, which turned out to be not a good thing in retrospect. But yeah, I caught it on NBC, but mostly the summer of 72 and then the fall of 72 when it continued, because it was at 8 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock, which at my tender age was significant.
Right, for sure. And moving it at that point too seems risky. At what point the beloved star Dan Blocker, who played Hoss, passed away suddenly, sadly. Was this moved after his death? Actually,
the decision to move the show was before Dan had passed away.
Okay.
Which is interesting and not too well known when you consider the timeline. Dan passed away in May of 1972, just weeks, if not days, before the 14th season was scheduled to commence.
Wow.
And another impactful decision was Chevrolet's decision to stop sponsoring Bonanza. And that had a lot to do with moving Bonanza from its Sunday night berth, because you'll remember, Bill, before Bonanza was Sundays at 9 o'clock, it was the Dinah Shore Chevy show.
Okay.
So Chevrolet was very much invested in the Sunday night hour.
Yeah.
So the withdrawing of Chevrolet as the exclusive sponsor, an almost unheard of thing back in those days, and certainly unheard of today. And the passing of Dan Blocker, number 2, which both preceded NBC's decision to move the show to Tuesdays.
Right. But just the same, 14 seasons, 431 episodes, an incredible run, second longest Western ever.
Correct.
Right.
Next to Gunsmoke.
After Gunsmoke. Now, one of the attractive things about this show for NBC in terms of extending it into a daytime run or special spin-offs was that was it always in color, but it was an early color TV show, right?
Correct. And thanks, Bill, for asking, because it gives me an opportunity to qualify and correct a popular misconception. Often it's described as television's first color Western, but that's just not true. I would think that distinction belongs to Northwest Passage, which was a half-hour Western adventure series that premiered on NBC a year earlier in the fall of 1958. Now, we could talk about whether something set in the 1820s is a Western. You all remember Spencer Tracy and Claudette Colbert in the wonderful MGM picture Northwest Passage, which inspired the short-lived television series that featured Buddy Epson. So is that a Western? I think so.
Yeah. Why not? Of course.
Yeah, why not? It was 30 minutes, though, so it's got that qualification. But Bonanza was the first hour-long television series regularly scheduled with continuing characters. So that's a pretty big claim to fame, I think, regardless of genre. There were, of course, spectaculars, specials, sports shows, even a handful of game shows, children's shows like Howdy Doody,
Howdy Doody, yeah,
which were filmed and broadcast in color prior to September 1959. But Bonanza was the first. We mentioned the Adventures of Superman earlier, and the Lone Ranger and Cisco Kid.
Cisco Kid, right?
They were filmed in color, Bill, but as you know, they were not broadcast in color.
Interesting. Okay. Canada's first color show was The Forest Rangers, which is unknown, I'm sure, in the States, but it was a series produced in the early 60s. With Gordon Pinsett and folks, and shot on film and in color. But the lovely thing then, so Bonanza basically sold a lot of color TV sets for RCA and NBC, right?
Correct. And that's also a bit of a misnomer that it was designed to sell color sets. That's certainly without question is what it did, but it was not the original intention. As David Dortort, the show's executive producer, initially line producer, who was doing everything and anything under the sun in those early formative days and months and seasons, he told me that he worked with Fred Hamilton, who was a very high-ranking programming executive at NBC at the time, and came up with this wonderful concept of a father and his three sons who were half-brothers set in the Lake Tahoe region in the days just before the Civil War. And I don't want to say almost as an afterthought, but it was David Dortort's idea to film the show in color because he felt RCA owned NBC and they would think it would be a good opportunity to showcase the wonderful, fairly new technology, especially with a show filmed in part outdoors. And
Andrew, that would have been an expensive move, right? I mean, a lot of people stuck to black and white because I think the Dick Van Dyke Show, CBS would have loved if they'd gone a few more years in color, but they had other reasons for moving on. But also the cost of making color episodes was another maybe $10,000 an episode back then.
In the case of Bonanza, which was probably pretty typical, it was in the neighborhood of 25% budget. So an additional 25% of the budget would have had to be devoted to color. Yeah. And after the decision was made to film in color, Bonanza's budget was in the neighborhood of $105,000, $110,000 an episode.
Expensive show.
So what's interesting about this story is, according to David Dortort, the decision makers at NBC's initial reaction was, no, thank you, it's too expensive. And so David countered, well, doesn't RCA own NBC? And isn't it obvious that there would be an advantage? And he was told, different division, they do their thing, we do ours. It's apples and oranges, which David found flabbergasting.
Right.
That's an adjective. And ultimately, cooler heads prevailed, and he got some allies in the decision-making process who agreed, yes, it would be a good idea to film it in color. So it ended up, in fact, being filmed in color. But I think it's interesting that initially they scoffed at it. And there are statistics that say more than any other show, people decided to buy and invest in which was then a hefty investment, color shows, because they would see Bonanza Sundays at 7:30 in showrooms that were still open at that time. So people would go downtown and they'd look in the windows and they'd see television sets in the windows, and Bonanza would be the only one broadcasting in color. So that had a lot to do with the Dortort,
a man of vision. He must have made everybody hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, Indeed. That was, good for him.
All right, yeah.
We'll be right back with so much more about Bonanza from DVD executive producer Andrew Klyde. Well, there's no better place for the holidays than Super Channel Heart and Home. This season's holiday offering include 19 merry movies new to Super Channel Heart and Home, including 12 festive films making their Canadian broadcast premieres. One of them is Country Hearts Christmas, and this one stars pro wrestlers Chris Jericho and Lainey McCauley. Where else can you see that? Lots of other titles. 'Twas the Text Before Christmas, A Royal Date for Christmas, Christmas on the Rocks. And all of these, you can stream them on demand all season long. Who are you going to see? Well, all your favorites. Danica McKellar, she's all grown up. Jill Wagner, Lori Loughlin, she's out of the Slammer. Jodie Sweetin, James Tupper, Vivica A. Fox, the list goes on, even Billy Baldwin. And we got great Canadians too in these films. Yes, you've got Jane Eastwood, who doesn't love her, Merritt Patterson, and Jessica Lowness, so check them out all season long. Great Christmas entertainment on the home of Christmas, Super Channel, Heart and Home. Well, here's a question. Are bass players human too? It's one Geddy Lee asks in a cool new docuseries that's streaming now on Paramount Plus, and that's the name of it, Are Bass Players Human Too? Geddy Lee, of course, the bass player and vocalist for Rush, and on the series, the 4 episodes, currently streaming on Paramount Plus, he visits some of his friends who are also bass players, renowned bass players, including Chris Novoselic from Nirvana, Les Claypool from Primus, Melissa Oftermar from Smashing Pumpkins, and Rob Trujillo from Metallica. And you know what? I have to say that Geddy Lee, he makes for a pretty good narrator and an awesome guest. It's really a lot of fun watching him going fishing and getting in planes and just, doing all kinds of stuff, making wine with his bass buddies. So check it out. It's Geddy Lee's Are Bass Players Human Too? Streaming now on Paramount Plus. And here he is again, Andrew Klyde. What I'm really curious about is the transfers that you have here are state of the art. You hear these tragic stories of how shows fall in ill repair, and not just TV shows, but classic comedies. The Laurel and Hardy archives they got just not stored properly and they were scattered. Hal Roach didn't think they were worth anything once they were shown in theaters. How were the original materials, the camera negatives for Bonanza, kept in such great shape that you were able to transfer them so well to DVD?
Excellent question, Bill. And I will go off on a very brief tangent because you touched on Laurel and Hardy, and as well as I do, our buddy Stan Taffel, who
yes.
Fill your ear with details. Thankfully, although the Laurel and Hardy original film elements were neglected for various reasons over the decades, in recent years, there's been a lot of work to redeem that and getting, in many cases, original nitrate elements and elements from all over the world. So with the help of UCLA and other archivists and restoration facilities, we are now, for the first time, able to see the Laurel and Hardy shorts and even the silence looking fantastic.
Yeah.
So this gives me an opportunity to praise technology. It's a cliche to say they don't make them like they used to, and indeed that's true. But in some cases, that's a good thing because now we can do much more than we were ever able to do before. And so, in the case of Laurel and Hardy or other vintage shows, there's an algorithm that can be created that can actually duplicate missing frames of film, so it looks seamless, which couldn't have been done a few years ago. Not to mention removing dust and dirt and scratches and color restorations. So in the case of Bonanza, although it was filmed with state-of-the-art equipment at Paramount Studios in color from day one, which was April of 1959, the show was owned by the national broadcasting company, NBC, so they had possession of all the original negatives, the film elements that were actually in the can. So you had the greatest of technicians behind the camera because you had at your command one of the world's greatest motion picture film studios, and see how he had guys like Buzzy Boggs, a cinematographer who goes back to the 1930s, working with Clark Gable and later Martin and Lewis. Just the best of the best technicians filming Bonanza. David Dortort would periodically get overtures from Kodak asking him if he could please try out their newest experimental color film, because they were always experimenting, trying to make the timing speed faster, because with color film, at least initially, you needed a lot of candle power. So the sets were very, very hot to get that bright, vivid color, which was not otherwise possible to do because of the relative slow speed of color film. So David, of course, was thrilled to have the opportunity to pioneer and work with the new experimental and increasingly faster film.
And would that be Kodachrome?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
So the color remained in that rich.
Actually, I'm blanking on whether it would be Kodachrome 35 millimeter film or Ektachrome. I think you're right. I think it would be Kodachrome, but it would very high quality and in the negative. Haskell Boggs said to me famously, "Andy, if you have it in the negative, you're always going to have it, and it'll always be there." And indeed, he's right. The proof is in the pudding, because now in recent years, because these 35 millimeter elements were so well preserved at NBC's film storage facilities in Fort Lee and West Englewood, New Jersey, when the time came to do restorations, they were able to go to the best possible source, and with the technology available today, restore and remaster films. So each episode looks like it was filmed yesterday.
Andy, I'm thrilled these guys had the foresight to do this, but isn't NBC notorious for also throwing out the first 10 years of The Tonight Show? I mean, not everything got saved, right?
Correct. And I can speculate that the distinction is
videotape to film.
Some people, I'm sorry?
But the distinction was between film and videotape?
I think some people joke that NBC stands for Nobody's Cheaper. So that's sort of a factor when it came to The Tonight Show, which was videotape on 2-inch quad color videotape in the case of Johnny Carson's tenure starting in 1962. And the 2-inch quad color videotape was pretty expensive because you didn't have too many of them. And so somebody decided to save money, we would just erase them and record over them. Right. So it's not like they were thrown away. They were recycled. They were reused, which was, of course, a terrible thing. And Johnny Carson personally put a stop to that when he became more autonomous and had more control and was able to change things with each subsequent contract renegotiation. But in the case of Bonanza, because NBC owned the show, they just sort of put it away and forgot about it at the storage facilities in New Jersey. And Bill, what's interesting is when Bonanza was first put on DVD back in, 2008 is when I had my first discussions, and the first season came out in 2009. And the irony is not lost on me that it took pretty much 15 years to produce Bonanza from season 1 to its last season. And it took pretty much 15 years from when the first came out on DVD and the last one was released earlier this year.
Yeah.
It was always sort of a pulling taffy kind of process. There was a wonderful person by the name of Ken Ross who oversaw the CBS home entertainment division for many years. And he believed in Bonanza. He believed in good quality vintage television and getting the best possible quality as much as possible. And so with rare exceptions, everything was transferred from original 35 millimeter in terms of CBS's overall product. In the case of Bonanza, we went back to the well and spent no small amount of money to restore and remaster from 35 millimeter film, but the sales numbers were not so good. So the result was season 2 was tweaked from existing masters that were created in 1989, 1990, from the original film onto analog masters. I think it was originally 3/4 inch and then later Beta SP and Digibeta. But the quality wasn't as good. So I remember the second season came out and I was sort of bracing to get bad reactions from people. But for the most part, didn't really hear too much. There were a few reviewers that said some episodes didn't look as sharp as others, but they attributed it to poor storage or that old chestnut, the age of the show, which is another thing that bothers me. And I'm sure you too, you have people who don't know any better who say, well, what can you expect? The show is 20 years old, 30 years old, fill in the number. All you have to do is point to Gone with the Wind or
right.
The Wizard of Oz, which looked like they were filmed yesterday because of the technology and the money that's available to restore and remaster. So season 2 was a disappointment. And then they were going to do season 3 the same way. And I wrote sort of a famous email and I said, I can understand you have a limited budget, but what about Bonanza's great international appeal? It was so popular in Canada and many other countries throughout the world, the single most popular show in the world, arguably in the 1960s, and it's still popular today. And so if you could say to other distributors in other countries, like, for example, Germany, where it's always been very popular, here you have newly restored and remastered product to syndicate on local television. Isn't that a big selling point? So apparently I struck a nerve, and Ken Ross, to his credit, he issued orders to stop the restoration process from the existing masters from season 3, and then to go back to the original camera negatives. So that was the prototype going forward after that.
Well, on behalf of TV lovers everywhere, thank you. That was wonderful, and it's great to hear that you were able to make that argument. Certainly, again, it's a business move, and
yes, exactly.
It's a very smart one. Talk a bit. You mentioned the producer of the show, Mr. Dortort. And,
yes,
talk a bit about the casting. From what I understand, Ben, he had someone else in mind for Ben Cartwright and just about every other cast member, right?
That's true. For Ben Cartwright, he wanted a very strong, commanding presence. Mm. And I've seen an early memo, which I'm sure you'll find very interesting, Bill. The memo described Ben Cartwright as a Charles Bickford type.
Okay.
Conjures up a very vivid picture.
Yeah.
And I don't recall Charles Bickford ever being strongly considered, although he played a Ben Cartwright type character in The Virginian not too many years later, succeeding Lee J. Cobb, who was, in fact, David Dortort's first choice.
Yeah.
And spoke to Lee J. Cobb's agent, who poo-pooed the suggestion and dismissed it very, very quickly with the standard Lee doesn't do television, which didn't hold true for too long, did it?
No, for sure.
And then for the role of Little Joe, Michael Landon was, his photograph was amongst several that David Dortort brought home one night. And according to legend and what David told me and his wife Rose confirmed, Rose Dortort, David's wife, looked at the photographs and picked out Michael Landon's and said, quote, "He's got a face blessed from heaven.
My
if
goodness.
He can act, use him." So that made the decision easier for David Dortort, who was also familiar with Michael's work because he was in the pilot episode of The Restless Gun, which David Dortort started producing after the pilot episode was made. He also considered Robert Blake, briefly, and
I can
Robert
see that.
Fuller. Yeah,
I can see Blake for sure.
1959, sure, very scrappy and mature from his Red Rider days.
Yeah,
and Robert Fuller. Robert Fuller was a personal favorite of David Dortort, but that wasn't really a practical one because he was under exclusive contract to MCA Review Universal, which was just sort of gearing up with Laramie at the same time.
And from what I understand, Dan Blocker, who played Haas, he was kind of ready to give up acting, wasn't he, just before he was cast in that role?
I'm not sure that that's completely accurate, that is the story that has trickled down over the years, and it's a good story. And, sometimes we shouldn't let facts get in the way of telling a good story. But I think that Dan was unknown without question. At that time, he was a school teacher. He taught high school English, and I think substituted as a physical ed teacher in suburbs of Los Angeles, and before that in New Mexico, and had come to Los Angeles a couple of years before Bonanza with the intention of trying to make a go of it as a professional actor at the encouragement of his good friend Eddie Firestone, who was an actor who was making sort of a name for himself as a utility character actor. And they had known each other in college in Texas. And Eddie said, give it a try. He had tried to talk Dan into coming on more than one occasion. And Dan said no initially, but finally changed his mind. And Herb Gold, who was Eddie's agent, became Dan's agent and got him a job almost immediately in an episode of Gunsmoke. So this would have been 1956. And then Dan did a variety of things after that, including memorably a goon from the planet Venus in Outer Space Jitters with the Three Stooges, where he was incorrectly billed as Don Blocker, but maybe that was just as well. And he had notably several guest spots on The Restless Gun, which was the show that David Dortort produced. And he was in several episodes, at least 3, I think. And it got to the point where John Payne would complain to David Dortort and say, why do you keep bringing back that big SOB? And David had to bite his lip and say, well, because he can act, unlike you. But he didn't say that. So in fact, when David was creating the Bonanza concept and writing the pilot episode, and nobody was cast yet, he had Dan Blocker in mind to play Hoss. Yeah. And as David tells the story, Dan was a little disillusioned with the whole business of acting because he wasn't getting the kinds of roles he felt he should get. Although, again, if you look at his resume, he was doing all right, and he had a lot of guest spots, but nobody knew who he was. And certainly the Bonanza move changed his career forever.
For sure.
Yeah. And then finally. I'm sorry, were you going to?
No, I was just imagine Dan Blocker as your gym teacher. I mean, you'd never be late for gym.
Yes,
that's hilarious. Talk about now. Pernell Roberts, he was cast as the eldest son, Adam, and famously quit the show after 5 or 6 seasons, right?
Yeah. Well, he was his part was the last one cast, and is an interesting bit of trivia. When David wrote the pilot episode, he had named the eldest son Evan. And after Pernell was cast as the eldest son, Pernell came to David Dortort and he said, I'm supposed to be playing the eldest son. The first man in the Bible is Adam. Why not call me Adam, the firstborn? And so David immediately said, okay, thou shalt be Adam from now on. But Pernell, like Michael and like Lorne and like Dan, had acted in a variety of shows on television and feature films, but wasn't a name. But David spotted him on the set of The Restless Gun again. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was not The Restless Gun. It was Cimarron City.
Okay.
Cimarron City with George Montgomery, well known at the time, I guess, as a furniture maker and Dinah Shore's husband. Wow. And Dan Blocker, coincidentally, had a small recurring role in Cimarron City, and he and Pernell were in the same episode. Pernell guest starred in Cimarron City, and The Restless Gun was filming on the same lot. So David was able to walk a short distance and observe filming and was very impressed with Pernell. And Pernell was also in Ride Lonesome, one of the wonderful little Western pictures that were the result of a collaboration between Bud Bettinger and Randolph Scott. And they have become very, very well regarded in later years. And so an NBC executive had seen a rough cut of Ride Lonesome and was impressed with Pernell. David had seen Pernell on the set of Cimarron City, and between the two, they agreed Pernell was the man for the job. And Lorne Greene Do you want to talk a bit about how Lorne was cast too?
Well, absolutely. This is the guy. I mean, in Canada, my parents knew him growing up.
Oh, really? Wow.
Well, not they didn't know him, but how Canadians knew him as the voice of doom. He was on CBC radio as a news anchor, and this was during the worst of the war, and he would deliver these terrible reports, and he had that deep booming voice. And later on he had his own broadcast school here. A lot of famous broadcasters went through the Lorne Greene school. So he was already had a career, but this role on Bonanza was life-changing, and I'm sure when it was offered to him, he probably didn't hesitate, right?
Well, as I understand the story, he was asked to appear in an episode of, I want to say, Playhouse 90. Mm-hmm. It was I think so. It was a live, one of the wonderful live shows from the so-called golden age of television. And in fact, that's how he transitioned successfully from a radio announcer, a radio performer, radio personality to an actor performing on stage and on screen, especially. In 1953, you may know the story. It's a pretty well-known story. He was in New York to try to promote an invention, a stopwatch that ran backwards.
Yeah, so he could time himself on radio and stuff, right?
Correct, and invaluable for radio people to see not so much what time it is, but how much time they have left before their time is up. So he was in New York making the rounds and had lunch with Fletcher Markle, his good buddy who he had known for many years. And I think Fletcher might have even taught at Lorne's school. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I know they knew each other for many years. And they had lunch, and Lorne went back to Toronto and got a call within a day or so from Fletcher. Hey, I have some news. Victor Jory, who is my narrator for production of George Orwell's 1984, is sick. He's got a terrible cold, flu, something or other, and I'm really in a jam. It's a live show, and we go on the air in 3 days. Please, can you come back to New York and play the part? So Lorne did that, and that was his first on-camera acting job, and it led to everything that followed. But it was just happenstance that he happened to be in New York at the time and called on Fletcher, and they had lunch together, and Fletcher remembered Lorne just a few hours later when he was in a jam. So that's 1953. You fast forward to 1959, and his agent got him a prestigious role on, I think it was Playhouse 90, which required him to go to New York, and I guess he was living in Toronto at the time, and he said, no, I don't think so. And she was shocked. She said, well, why? And he said, I can't explain it exactly, but is there anything available on the coast in California? So she said, let me look around. And she got back to him and she said, there's an episode of Wagon Train, but it's much less money. And I think you should go to New York and take the more prestigious gig. So Lorne said, no, I think I'll take the Wagon Train. So she said, okay. And so on the set of Wagon Train, David Dortort observed him, similar to how he observed Pernell Roberts not too long after that, and was very impressed with his acting skills. And if that wasn't enough of a coincidence, there was an NBC programming executive by the name of Jerry Stanley, who was at the home of a friend, and the friend's mother had passed away. So Jerry was paying a condolence call, a Shiva call, and Lorne Greene was also there. Why was Lorne there? He was in California, as I mentioned, temporarily because of the Wagon Train gig, and got a call from his mother who said, our dear friend so-and-so, family friend, has passed away. Go to the family's home and pay a Shiva call. And Lorne said, but Ma, I'll go later in the week. She said, no, go tonight, go now. It's very important. He said, but it's my birthday, February 12th, 1959. So, Of course, he listened to his mother and he went. And that's where he met Jerry Stanley. And Jerry was there with his wife, Anne, and they both looked at each other and said, look, there's Ben Cartwright. And so between that meeting And David Dortorts, seeing Lorne on the set, his fate certainly was sealed. But
what a story!
Yeah, he could have very easily been in New York doing another prestigious live show. And I don't know who we would have had as Ben Cartwright, maybe a poor man's Lee J. Cobb or somebody. But,
whoa, hold on there, partner. We'll be back in a moment with Bonanza archivist and expert Andrew Klyde.
Went to a pub, went to a party with a little bit of work you might get a B. Your books are overdue, the school is gonna sue, and your doc's gonna give you the third degree. You get that aching feeling when your essays due. Round here it's called a varsity blues.
Hey, are you like me? Are you into retro TV Christmas episodes? Have I got a treat for you? I'm going to be in the Westdale Cinema on Wednesday, December 20th at 1 p.m. And I'll be there with my 16-millimeter projector, and I'm going to throw on the big screen at the Westdale Cinema 2 classic Christmas episodes. Can't really tell you the names of the shows, but one features a witch and the other Dick Van Dyke. Anyway, you're going to see these. You're going to see classic commercials in there. You're going to hear reactions from people in the cinema watching a TV show on a big theater screen. It's a cool way to see it. You'll clickety-click of the projector. Plus, at this retro TV party, you could win prizes. And the big one is a Paramount Plus subscription, a streaming subscription, 1-year subscription. So, hats off to Paramount Plus. Come on out, watch these classic Christmas episodes, and to get tickets and information, go to thewestdale.ca. And we're back with Andy Klyde. Well, I don't know if you had a chance to listen. Lucille Ball's daughter had produced that Let's Talk to Lucy podcast episodes over the last couple of years. They were fascinating. They were CBS radio broadcasts that were made in, I think, 1965 that they kind of re-edited into short podcasts. One of them was Lucy, and at the time she was the boss of Desilu Productions.
Yes, sure.
And she was walking the studio, and she would interview various people. And one of them was Lorne Greene. And he told this amazing story, a lot of great stories. She had him on for 4 segments. One of them was how really he was kind of portraying his dad a bit as Ben Cartwright. And that's something that you were able to learn as well. Is that true?
Sure. I can certainly confirm that. And I guess it's human nature. We naturally hearken back to people we have known and who have inspired us. And his father, Daniel Greene, was a very powerful, although quiet, force of nature. And as Lorne told interviews, and maybe even Lucy on this occasion, his father rarely resorted to any sort of physicality as far as discipline, but he just had a sort of look.
Right.
He would shoot you that look and freeze in your tracks. And so Lorne tried to use that look when Ben Cartwright needed to look at people, particularly his sons. And so, that was very effective. And I know Lorne, one of his great regrets was his father, Daniel, did not live long enough to see Bonanza because he passed away not too long before the show started production. Yeah, absolutely true. Yeah.
Quite a story. Now, a lot of this comes out in some of the extras that you were able to find as part of this amazing complete set of Bonanza that's out on DVD. And there was these shows, Canada Telescope with Fletcher Markle, you mentioned as host. How did you come to learn of these? Did you actually visit the CBC archive? How did you find out?
I did do that in 1997. I was approached by someone who was producing and directing the series Life and Times. And Life and Times was doing a segment devoted to Lorne Greene. And a wonderful woman by the name of Halia Kuchmi found me somehow, and we hit it off very well, and she hired me as a consultant. And at the time, I had something of a reputation as knowing quite a bit about Lorne Greene and Bonanza and television history, and we worked very well together. And I told her there was going to be a small informal gathering of Bonanza enthusiasts in upstate New York as sort of a prelude to a convention, a full-blown convention, which was to be held at Lake Tahoe a year later. So I guess this was 1998. And Halia brought a small crew. Well, she brought a cameraman with her and a video camera, and she filmed. I guess there were about 15, 20 of us who gathered to talk about Bonanza and watch episodes projected onto a big screen. And I remember she interviewed some people afterward to ask their reactions, opinions about Bonanza generally, and Lorne Greene specifically. There were several people who were from Canada. So that was how our relationship started. And she very kindly was able to provide to me a list of material within the CBC that pertained to Lorne, and it was not a small number. So that's how I found out about Telescope, which I'm sure you know and your listeners know was a wonderful series, which featured fantastic footage of all of the notables of the day. I know they did a segment on James Bond films with Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman and Kiefer Sutherland's dad, Donald Sutherland. Well, just the list of two.
I have a 16 millimeter print of Fletcher Markle talking to Rich Little.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was quite a series. I've seen another one where they go down to LA and talk to Adam West on the set of Batman.
Wow. Yeah.
This
was the same thing they did with Lorne Greene and Bonanza. And for those who haven't seen it, it's a wonderful, wonderful treat to be able to go behind the scenes, literally. The crew was on the set for 2 episodes. The Legacy and The Boss, and talked with Lorne Greene, of course, and David Dortort and Nancy Green. And then the crew went to RCA Victor Studios on Sunset Boulevard to film footage of Lorne talking with prominent RCA executives, Steve Scholes and Joe Reisman. Steve Scholes, I guess, is best known as the man who really orchestrated Elvis Presley's record career at RCA for many years. And then the crew traveled to Independence, Missouri, where you see probably the only surviving visual footage of Lorne's infamous rodeo act, where he dances a bit and accompanied by the Ponderosa Trio, where they play the Bonanza theme. So it's a wonderful time capsule of Bonanza at the height of its success. And to be able to go to a rodeo or state fair and see your favorites in front of you that you see every week on television.
That is amazing. Yeah. That's very cool. Well, you mentioned these upstate New York gatherings. Did you ever go to Cinefest in Syracuse?
I know of it, and it's very high up on my list of places to visit, but honestly, I have not yet.
All right. At that one, no longer, they folded that tent, but there was a great gathering. I used to drive down from Toronto, and there was a lot of 16 millimeter collectors, a lot of them from New York and Philadelphia and different places. So I was just curious. We're talking about these extras. Now, I was working for TV Guide Canada, and I was down in LA, and I wanted to try and interview Michael Landon, who was working on a new show after Little House on the Prairie. He was doing a series called US or Us. Us, okay. And a friend of mine, because I had been photo editor of TV Guide Canada, was Gene Trindle. And Gene was a great photographer, shot
wonderful guy.
Yeah. You knew,
astonishingly talented. Aren't enough adjectives to describe him.
I agree. And a great person beyond just his photo skills. But he knew Harry Flynn, who was buddies with managed to help publicize Landon's shows, right?
Yeah.
So Gene said, well, you should talk to Michael Landon. So he set it up, and I got to go down to, I think it was Culver City, and interview Landon in his offices, and he was working on this new show. And I was literally, it was my last stop. I think I had my luggage with me on my way back to the airport to fly home. But he regaled for like an hour, and I talked to him for at least an hour and laughed the whole time. And his stories about Lorne Greene and his horse riding skills. Landon joked he would ride behind Lorne Greene, and he said you could shoot the bad guys every time Lorne went up in the saddle between him and the horse. It was very, very funny. Sadly, like a week later, Landon learned that he had inoperable cancer, and it was a shocking moment. I remember hearing the news on the radio, and to make a long story a little bit shorter, I did this interview, and we ran a story in TV Guide years ago, but you managed to find out I had done this, I guess maybe through the podcast I made of that conversation recently. And remarkably, it's one of the extras in this Bonanza box set. So thank you for including me in your work on this great collection.
Well, my recollection is our mutual buddy Stan Taffel told me about it, and it was wonderful to learn about because I knew the sensitivity of the timing. I knew that he discovered that he was ill just days after you spoke to him because he went to, I think it was Utah, for a skiing vacation with his family, and his wife, Cindy, insisted that he cut the vacation short and go back to Los Angeles because he was complaining of terrible stomach pains. And he probably had endured pain for a while before that, but being Michael Landon and stoic, he dismissed it. But thankfully, his wife insisted, and unfortunately, we found out the terrible, terrible news afterward. But what was so wonderful, I think, about your opportunity, thanks to Gene Trindle and Harry Flynn, was you extracted from Michael things that I had never heard before. And in my travels and in my research, I've heard a good deal. And I guess, like many of us, we have our standard stories that are tried and true, and we tell them over and over to different audiences. So Michael would tell the same variations on the Tonight Show or talking to Dinah Shore or other venues. And so it was wonderful to hear many of them again when you spoke to him. But when he told the anecdote of he and Dan teasing Lorne mercilessly on the steps of the Granada Theater in August 1959 on the occasion of Bonanza's world premiere, I had never heard that before. Hey, Lorne, your fly's open. What? No, your fly? You're kidding? No, I'm not kidding you, Lorne. And they convinced him. He's standing on stage in front of hundreds of people thinking that his fly is open to these two jokers. And it's a wonderful story, which I'd never heard before, and so typical of the sophomoric or kindergarten, if you will, humor of Dan Blocker and Michael Landon. Especially, you get those two guys together, it's all hell breaks loose. So
I imagine
priceless. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad there was a nugget or two there that was unique, and it was all fascinating for me, and I felt very fortunate. Landon just took so much time and was just very generous, I found. And from what I understand, was beloved by his crew. I think there were guys who worked on Bonanza, who worked on all of Landon's shows. These guys worked 30 years with him, pretty much consecutive, right?
For sure. I remember I met him. He was in New York. He was in New York to accept an award from American Women in Radio and Television for the work he had done in behalf of women in the industry. And I had a chance to chat with him a little bit. And I remember asking him, do you regret not going to a film school like NYU or UCLA? And he said, hell no. I went to the greatest film school in the world, the Bonanza set.
Yeah, I bet.
And I thought that was telling.
And Andy, where was it shot? Where was the series? A lot of it, I'm sure, was in a studio, but there was some exteriors. And I know there are Western ranches that are no longer there in LA. But where exactly over the course of the series was it mainly shot?
Well, you're right, Bill. The interiors were shot on a soundstage at Paramount Studios. And to give you an example of the lack of faith that the studio decision makers had in this upstart new television series, and it was the very first major television series to be filmed at Paramount. There was a half-hour show called Sally that was produced there a few years before, but that's really a blip in television history, and most people have never heard of it. But and it didn't last very long. But Bonanza started in the spring of 1959. And they were assigned a soundstage that had recently been converted from a VistaVision screening room.
Wow.
Can you imagine?
No.
They didn't even want to give them a real soundstage.
It doesn't sound big enough.
Yeah, you would think. But after, I think, 6 months, somebody decided that really was not workable. So they moved it to bigger sound stages. The interior of the Ponderosa was on one sound stage and the exterior on another. And, of course, on the interior, you also had sets that you needed as needed, the interior of the sheriff's office or the saloon, or one of the son's bedrooms. But the exteriors, location footage, initially was at Lake Tahoe. And Michael, again, tells a wonderful story how when you're asked, can you ride? Of course, you say yes. Like the wind, I was born in the saddle. None of them really could ride worth a damn. I think Purnell was probably the least lousy of the bunch. And if you see Purnell in an early episode of Gunsmoke, directed by John Rich, who was best known for
Dick Van Dyke Show.
And he modestly takes credit for bringing Purnell from New York to start his career in Hollywood. And I don't think that's quite true. But again, you can't let the facts get in the way of a good story. It's painfully obvious that Purnell has absolutely no idea what to do on a horse in this Gunsmoke episode. But by the time he did Bonanza, a couple of years later, he had improved a great deal. And so Michael says the four guys went to Tahoe after they got the word that the pilot was successful and it would be a series, to do establishing shots, stock footage of the guys riding back and forth, left to right, up and down, one at a time, two at a time, three at a time, etc. And so that's all they did for 2 weeks, just mostly riding. And Michael said that they were so sore they couldn't sit down. The four guys would have to have dinner standing up at the bar every night. And just to hear Michael tell the story, you can imagine how
is this when they shot and it's included as an extra in their first season, and I think in the box set, the notorious second ending to the original pilot, where the four of them on horseback sing the Bonanza theme?
Exactly right, or tried to sing. Yeah, yeah. The song Bonanza was composed by Jay Livingston. Jay Livingston was the brother of Alan Livingston, who was a high-ranking NBC executive. In fact, he was the head of programming at NBC at the time. He had recently been lured away from Capitol Records, where he was a high-ranking executive and was, among other things, notable for creating Bozo the Clown.
Wow.
On record. And Bozo the Clown certainly is iconic to people of a certain age. And then Capitol Records lured him away from NBC a few years after this. And in fact, he wasn't with NBC more than a couple of years, I think at the most. And during his second tenure at Capitol Records, he was instrumental in getting the Beatles signed on their record label. So I like to think of Alan Livingston as responsible for three B's in our popular culture: Bozo, Bonanza, and the Beatles. But his brother Jay Livingston wrote music, and his partner Ray Evans collaborated with him for lyrics. And the lyrics for the Bonanza theme were, shall we say, less than inspired. And so they rehearsed with these guys to sing, to warble, whatever you want to call it, the lyrics. And fortunately, Purnell, who ironically was the best singer of the bunch, was spared because the script called for him to be off smooching Yvonne DiCarlo. So
another Canadian.
Yeah. Yes, exactly right. So he didn't have to sing. And I guess somebody, fortunately, on the set decided, we really should shoot this ending again without them singing and have them ride off whooping just in case. so fortunately, they had an alternative, and that's what they decided to use when the show aired. But thankfully, the footage survived. So at the last possible moment, I was able to find it. A fellow who was a friend of Stan Taffel's and who you may know or you should know, Bob Fermanack. Bob Fermanack has done wonderful work with film restorations. Most recently, Abbott and Costello shows and Jack and the Beanstalk and Robot Monster, an underrated gem, which thanks to Bob and his partner Jack Thiessen, I think will get the accolades it deserves. But Bob Fermanack and I have known each other for a long time, and principally through Sons of the Desert. I do legal work for the Laurel and Hardy Fan Appreciation Society. And Bob introduced me to his brother Ron. And Ron Fermanack is a great archivist, collector, has worked in locating and restoring wonderful music tracks, Sinatra, the Beatles, Perry Como, and he was able to extract from me somehow, somewhere, the footage of the Cartwrights riding off singing. And I wrote to Ken Ross, and head of CBS Home Entertainment. I said, I found this wonderful footage. I think we should use it. And I remember he wrote back at something like 11 o'clock at night, and he said, yes, absolutely. It was too late to incorporate it into packaging, which, as you know, is very important for marketing and sales reasons. But brilliantly, he said, well, we'll put a sticker on it. So we put a sticker on top of the cellophane that says rare alternate Cartwright singing.
If ever anything needed a sticker, that was brilliant. We'll be right back with so much more about Bonanza from DVD executive producer Andrew Klyde. Well, the weather outside is frightful, but don't worry, CTV and its suite of specialty channels promises to keep things warm and delightful all season long with an array of fan favorite and new seasonal movies, specials, and binge-worthy marathons. What do they got? Well, I'm glad you asked. They've got Christmas with the Cranks. They've got Elf. They got Frozen, Home Alone, Lost in New York, even oldies like Miracle on 34th Street and A Christmas Carol. Home Alone, of course. All kinds of great classic films. Plus Christmas episodes. Look for episodes of Shark Tank, MasterChef Junior. Even The Masked Singer has a holiday sing-along coming up. It's all on CTV and CTV2 and on their other specialty channels as well. You know, if you go on over to CTV's Life channel, more than 150 hours of festive movies. So listen, catch the Christmas spirit on CTV and all the Bell channels this holiday season, and have a Merry Christmas. Time once again to check in with Emily Gagne at Hollywood Suite. Emily, 'tis the season. What do you got for us?
Well, it is the season for our free preview bill, which means that our 4 HD channels and our on-demand service are available for free.
What?
With most cable providers across Canada.
Wow, that's a deal. That's a Christmas present right there.
That's what we like to think of it as. And, you know, like, this is a perfect opportunity for you to sit down with your family and watch some Christmas favorites like The Holiday, Love Actually, The Jim Carrey Grinch, Black Christmas. We've got them all this season.
Wow. And any other animated, maybe, features for Christmas?
We have something that I know you'll love, and I'm sure lots of others will love. which are two 70s Peanuts films. We have Snoopy Come Home and Race for Your Life, Charlie Brown, which is, I think, pretty awesome.
Vintage Peanuts with the original voices, original animators. Emily, what a lineup. Merry Christmas. Thanks for this.
Thank you, Bill.
And here he is again, Andrew Klyde. Andy, I'm dazzled by your memory, retaining all these names and facts and information. It's fantastic.
Oh,
and I wanted just one thing you mentioned was the exteriors and the Ponderosa itself and the sets. And I believe this is another nugget that's part of the bonus material is Lorne Greene. The fact that he actually constructed a replica of the Ponderosa in property he owned, one of several properties. He sort of built the Ponderosa, didn't he?
Correct. And that's fascinating. And people can still visit it. In fact, I was a guest at the inaugural, what they hope to be an annual TV West Fest in Tucson, Arizona this past spring, and we had a wonderful side trip to Lorne Greene's former home, which he dubbed Ponderosa 2, and the current owner very graciously allowed us to have a tour for an afternoon, and they hired a local cowboy personality to do tricks on his horse and sing songs. We had a real wonderful Western barbecue out in the backyard. And it was a fantastic time, and hopefully they'll do it again. But Tom Swan and Louise Swan, fans of Bonanza and Lorne Greene for many years, bought the home in 2011, if I'm not mistaken, from the owner who had purchased it from Lorne Greene and Nancy Greene. Who had lived there on and off for a few years, but as Lorne told the story, it became increasingly difficult because the house was adjacent to a local golf course, and people on the fairway, I think between the 8th and 9th hole, couldn't resist the temptation to wander off the course and peer into Lorne's bedroom because his bedroom was facing the golf course. So Lorne would get out of bed groggily, and he'd saunter over to the window, and he'd look out and he'd see a pair of eyes staring back at him.
Oh my God, that is hilarious.
But to fully answer a question you posed earlier, in addition to filming at Lake Tahoe, the crew would go to a number of local places, Elysian Fields, Vasquez Rocks, Death Valley, Chatsworth, and they would go in later years to Arizona, outside of Tucson and Old Tucson, where High Chaparral was also filmed, Sonora and Northern California. So they took advantage of a number of locations, and often the trucks would leave the Paramount Gate at dawn or before dawn and drive many hours to get to remote locations so they could
Amazing. Film. I've been to the Gene Autry Melody Ranch about an hour north of LA, I guess, and they shot Deadwood and different things there. It's a very robust standing set that is fascinating, and fingers crossed, thank goodness it hasn't burnt to the ground in some kind of a wildfire yet. But it's so cool to walk the streets of something like that and see those saloon facades and everything, isn't it? Pretty exciting.
Sure. And that was so wonderful about Bonanza's Virginia City. It looked like an accurate Western town, and the only thing that was pretty fake about it was the mountain. And the story goes that occasionally pigeons would land on top of the mountain to shatter the illusion of size and distance. But the mountain was very practical because it hid from view the water tower in the adjacent studio, which was the former RKO Studios, but in the 60s was Desilu. And so you saw a water tower with the name Desilu on it, and that's why the mountain obscured that.
Right downtown. My God, that's crazy. I've been walking around there. You would think if there was one thing Paramount could supply, it would be a decent mountain. You know?
You would think so. But instead it was paper mache.
Yeah. Listen, we have to wrap this up. It's fascinating. I had a couple other questions just briefly about other shows you've worked on. What else have you archived? Have you curated? Have you produced for DVD? Have there been some that were just tremendously challenging in terms of source material? How far have you had to go to rescue a show, I guess?
I would say, well, first I would like to say to people who are listening and are perhaps on the fence that I urge you to consider giving physical media a try generally, and specifically Bonanza. People may say, well, I'm not really a Westerns fan, and Bonanza's a Western. And I would say Bonanza, incidentally, is set in the West, but Lorne Greene used to refer to it as an Eastern to distinguish it from, say, a classic Western like The Searchers or Shane or episodes of Gunsmoke, although Bonanza had plenty of those classic episodes that fit the bill in terms of the Western genre. He emphasized, and I'd like to re-emphasize, that the show's great appeal was its versatility. You could have an action adventure one week, a tear-jerking romance the next week, a thought-provoking controversial show the following week, a knee-slapping hysterical comedy the week after that, even a fantasy show. There was an episode called Twilight Town, which could have been an episode of The Twilight Zone. Did Little Joe wander into a real ghost town and meet ghosts, or did he not?
What season was that?
That was season 5, I believe.
Wow.
Twilight Town.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, look for that. So I would say give Bonanza a try because of its versatility and also if I can honestly say so, the bonanza of special features, of extras, which the set is loaded with probably more than any other show that I could think of.
It's rich. Yeah, no, you've done an amazing job. And also, Andrew, it's packed with guest stars, Oscar winners, people that later became huge, right?
Correct. People on the way up, and then people who were at the top of their game but wanted to flex their muscles. We mentioned Canada's own Yvonne DiCarlo and Jack Carson and Barry Sullivan and Ida Lupino and Jane Greer, Ms. Film Noir, Lloyd Nolan, so many wonderful people from the golden age of film that were in those early Bonanza episodes. And then people who were not so well known at the time but became very well known, like Jonathan Harris, Lost in Space, and Leonard Nimoy. In fact, the entire cast of Star Trek, except William Shatner.
Really? That's funny.
Found their way onto the Ponderosa.
James Coburn, right?
Pardon?
James Coburn?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And Burnell were buddies. They worked together and Ride Lonesome. And certainly Coburn had a very successful career, and he was in several Bonanza episodes. And Stephanie Powers, Sandy Duncan.
Really?
Charles Bronson, and Tim Matheson, who is still had a very impressive career now, filming Virgin River on location in Canada. He
came in at the very last season, did he? Or last couple?
Yeah. And he was just sort of coming into his own when NBC pulled the plug prematurely, I would argue. But and David Canary, a great actor known to a certain generation as Adam and Stuart Chandler from All My Children. He was the foreman of the Ponderosa Ranch for many years. Victor Sen Young, Charlie Chan's number 2 son for many years. Very versatile, wonderful character actor, brought in primarily for comedic relief, but also did some controversial shows that dealt with bigotry and prejudice. Other shows that I've been involved with and had the opportunity and the privilege to bring to physical media, Gunsmoke. I'm proud of my association with Ben Costello, who was a big Gunsmoke fan and wrote a book, The Definitive History of Gunsmoke, and Becky Burgoyne, who wrote a wonderful biography of Amanda Blake. And I had them film little segments where they described the best episodes of a particular season, and of course a lot of photo galleries. The High Chaparral, I was able to find vintage interviews with Henry Darrow and had wonderful audio commentaries from people like Don Collier and Rudy Ramos, who's very popular now in Yellowstone. I will mention very briefly a misfire, which still stings to this day, and that is Time Life's Best of the West. This was just before the pandemic, and I was recruited to pick episodes of what I thought were the best representations of television westerns. So, of course, Bonanza and Gunsmoke were at the top of the list, but other shows like Have Gun Will Travel, Laramie, Wagon Train, Death Valley, Days, Wild Wild West, The Rebel, and I thought it would be a no-brainer. It would sell very well. But the way Time Life works is they create an infomercial and a darn good one, I think they did, and play it at 2 a.m. for a weekend. And if there are enough people to answer the 800 number calls to call in, then they'll go ahead with the project. And in this case, there were not quite enough people who called, which is mystifying. You know, they have the best of Laugh-In, the best of All in the Family.
Yeah.
And who knows what the Time Life puts out successfully. So I don't know why there wasn't room for the best of TV Westerns, but I hope to maybe give it a home somewhere else.
Yeah. As we mentioned earlier, I collect 16 millimeter fall preview prints to various years, and I have a 1961, and it's an NBC sales reel, really, and it's just packed with Westerns in 1960. And one of them is a show Brian Keith is starring in, and I believe Sam Peckinpah was a director
the
on. Yes.
And Peckinpah created it in addition to directing.
Okay, well, there's like a 5 or 6 minute clip, and it's fascinating. It looks amazing. I would love to see the full episode. I would love to watch it. It only lasted maybe half a season or a full season. I don't know.
Not too long. No.
But when you think of all of these shows that were launched and made, and it would be great to have an anthology of one season wonders or things like that, right?
I agree. 100%.
Is there a series that you would love to take a run at and restore and produce as a box set? Is there some holy grail out there for you personally that you would just jump into?
Adventures of Superman.
Okay.
Adventures of Superman was filmed in 35 millimeter, and starting from the third season was filmed in color, but not broadcast until a decade later in 1965. And episodes were released on DVD through Warner Brothers a few years ago, but only the first 2 seasons were from 35 millimeter sources. And the subsequent seasons were from 16 millimeter. And I would love to have an opportunity to have all of the episodes transferred from 35 millimeter and to have trailers, previews, subsequent shows which exist but have not been released. And in the mid-50s, 20th Century Fox, another studio, licensed the rights to have episodes of Adventures of Superman recut and released as a handful of feature films outside of the United States. And to connect otherwise episodes that had nothing to do with each other, the cast was called back to film bridge scenes, most likely in Perry White's office. And that footage exists. I believe so, but it hasn't been seen, and that would be wonderful to
Wow. That is tantalizing. I can't see why this would not be a huge seller. Superman, my goodness. I think, Marvel and DC is just monumental in terms of people's affection for that superhero. So that is an exciting idea. I hope you get to do that. And I guess that's why the black and white Superman episodes look so good. They're made from the 35s, right?
Right, exactly. And George Reeves was a wonderful actor who really made the character believable and gave him a humanity that you rarely saw in subsequent incarnations. I take nothing away from Christopher Reeve and Dean Cain and others who essayed the character very well, but to my mind and to the mind of many, George Reeves is the personification by which all others must be measured.
Yeah, hear. Listen, what do you watch now? Is there a new series that you just think is pretty great? Do you
I
You have
like
a favorite?
House. I like Fall of the House of Usher, which was a miniseries on Netflix recently. Adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe stories, very, very loose adaptations, I must say, but very cleverly done. And Bruce Greenwood at the top of a wonderful, wonderful cast. Um, I I like Ghosts, the original BBC version, and more recently the CBS
Yeah.
remake for North American audiences. So yeah,
Good choices.
yeah.
How about when you were a youngster? Maybe it was Superman, but what was
Oh,
it?
definitely was. But
Yeah,
in
yeah.
addition, Supercar. Gary, Sylvia Anderson's Super
Yes.
Marionation process.
Super Marionation. I love that show too.
Supercar and Stingray and Fireball XL5 and
Yeah.
a little later Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons and Gigantor. I had a fondness for Japanese animation before anime was well known. Gigantor and Astro Boy, and Marine Boy, and Speed Racer, of course.
Yeah, I know all of that. I grew up with certainly, and even Superman. When I saw it, Andrew, was there was a local kids show out of Buffalo, New York, Commander Tom, and Tom Joles was the host and ran for many, many years. And it was packaged with Popeye cartoons, but also they would have a half-hour Superman in the middle or Flash Gordon.
Wow.
One year they did Highway Patrol with Broderick Crawford, which was ridiculous when you were 8 watching.
Surreal.
Yeah, but that's how I first saw the Superman episodes, and man, that was a good time. Finally, do you have an all-time favorite TV theme song?
I'm very fond of the Bonanza theme for obvious reasons, but even if I wasn't pretty knowledgeable about Bonanza, I would rank that theme as one of the best. It's so simple and yet so memorable, and it's been arranged and re-recorded many, many, many times. And this is an interesting, fascinating behind-the-scenes story, which Jay Livingston and Ray Evans told to me. They wrote this song, or Jay wrote the melody rather quickly, and it was pretty simple. And he envisioned it as sort of a march, dum da da dum da da dum da da dum 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 dum, and he gave it to Billy May. Billy May, the arranger who worked with Frank Sinatra and so many other wonderful composers, and just a great arranger. And he sped it up, and they had David Rose's orchestra record it, and it was David Rose who tacked on the ending, dun 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 dun. That didn't exist when Jay Livingston wrote it. So with those wonderful talents combining forces, the end result was pretty amazing. And the arrangement, principally guitars, double, triple tracked. You had Tommy Tedesco and Bob Bain, the greatest guitar players of the industry of the era, who played on everything from the Munsters theme to the Addams Family, to you name the show or the film, and these studio musicians, the so-called Wrecking Crew, worked on it, and these guys also worked on the Bonanza theme. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, that twanging opening guitar chord, my God. I would really, when you were sitting down there waiting for that show to start, the burning of the map and the music and those guys, it really set it up, made it exciting, right?
Here's a tidbit about the iconic theme song, the third season incarnation. Starting with the third season, you see the four guys, the four legendary horsemen, riding up a crest of a hill and pull up to a full stop. Behind them is Lake Tahoe in the background. And as Michael Landon would joke, hopefully there wouldn't be a motorboat that would go passing by in the background. And the fellow who envisioned that, who directed that iconic opening of the four guys, was none other than Robert Altman.
My goodness.
Wonderful director Robert Altman directed a handful of episodes Bonanza's second year and the beginning of the third year, and he went to Tahoe with the crew to film the opening credits, which they used for many years thereafter.
It's all there. All this is in the extras. Before I forget, we were talking about Commander Tom. Another thing he would show on that show was Roger Ramjet cartoons. And I have this one. There's an episode, and it's set at the Ponderosa. And they've got Tiny Fred instead of Little Joe and Cow instead of Hoss. The writing wasn't that clever, but it still made me laugh. And my God, it's a very funny parody of Bonanza. But Mike, let's remind people, Bonanza, the official complete series, it's all there on DVD, all 431 episodes. You'll never see more pristine, clean, just beautiful episodes of anything, from the original camera negatives in 35 millimeter that is very lovingly restored, and the tidbits, the bonus material. It's just mouth-watering if you're a collector and a lover of television, and this show in particular. Where can people get this, Andrew? Where should they buy or order their own copies of either individual seasons of the show or the entire set?
Well, people can buy the individual season sets, and that includes seasons 12, 13, and 14, which were released earlier this year simultaneously with the complete series box set. So there are a handful, I suppose, who don't feel they want to double dip because they've already bought the individual seasons starting from the beginning. But I would gently remind them that season 2 is newly remastered and restored, so that's worth getting again. Yeah. And it has new extras. It has vintage interviews with Martin Landau and Ricardo Montalban talking about two wonderful shows from the second year. And the legendary, fantastic Stella Stevens did a commentary for me for the second season show she did, directed by Robert Altman, exquisitely, by the way. And I went back into the studio recently and supplemented her audio commentary with additional facts and trivia that she just wouldn't know because that's not her business to know. But I think it enhanced the audio commentary. So there's that reason for season 2. And then, of course, the fantastic extras. So I would say, even though you had the earlier seasons, you bought them individually, and I'm grateful and appreciative you did that. Buy the complete box set to get the bonus disc, which, as you've said, Bill, is really a treasure trove of wonderful things that you can't see anywhere else. It's just really nice to have.
Absolutely. Listen, Andrew, hats off to you. Kudos to all the fine people who worked on this. And if you collect television shows, this is the one you got to run out and get. Thank you very much. You've been very generous with your time today. Hope to catch up with you soon, talk to you about a million other things.
Oh, I would love that. And Amazon, by the way, again, to answer your question, the best place probably to buy the set is Amazon. And I think it's reduced significantly now because of the holiday season. Last I checked, it was something like $173 US.
Wow. Down from about $250, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And I guess you could probably find it at Barnes & Noble and your favorite box stores, but Amazon is probably the easiest way to get it.
That would absolutely be the case. Please listen in, and then absolutely, if you have a lover of television, not just Westerns, not just Bonanza, there's so much here. It's like a graduate course in the genre. Andrew, thank you very, very much for your time again, and always a pleasure. Hope to talk to you again real soon.
Oh, it was a pleasure for me too, and I thank you, Bill. Thank you for the wonderful job you're doing, perpetuating classic television and current television shows. What you're doing is fantastic, and I am hard-pressed to think of anyone who does it better than you do. And I appreciate, and I'm honored to be here to chat with you.
Very kind of you. Thank you so much. All right. Take care.
You too.
No surprise that Mr. Klyde picked the theme from Bonanza as his all-time favorite. And since he is also the lawyer who clears Bonanza tie-ins, well, here's a few seconds of the theme, used with permission. Thanks as always to producer Phil Hong for putting the saddles on and getting this episode out of the barn in style. Special thanks to my friend Stan Taffel, president of LA's annual Labor Day Cinecon Classic Film Festival, for alerting Andrew Klyde that I had a little extra he might want for his big Bonanza Complete Series DVD edition. Thanks as well to the Crispy Critters, especially BJ Del Conte and Paul Boudra, as well as my old pal Stephen Dudley on keyboard for the music used on these podcasts. And to you, listener, if you enjoyed what you heard here today, please favor us with a review or a like. I'm Bill Brio. Thanks for listening.